Seriously? They actually allow individuals like you to be employed here? The customer's mockery echoed throughout the grocery store, ensuring his disdain reached every corner. You ought to keep that device concealed instead of displaying it so openly. Jessica Williams remained unmoved, continuing to process the items while her artificial limb tapped quietly on the floor tiles. She offered no defense, no explanation, simply remained there, bearing invisible wounds that ran deeper than anyone could imagine. When the entire establishment fell into an uncomfortable silence, as if even the shelving units were holding their breath, an elderly gentleman stepped forward. With a voice that seemed to awaken the entire community from its slumber, he spoke 6 simple words that transformed everything forever. If you believe authentic courage doesn't require flawless bodies, if you understand that bravery often whispers rather than shouts, stay with us. This narrative will forever change how you view real heroes. Welcome to Compassion Chronicles, where stories of empathy and human kindness unfold. Let's discover what truly transpired. The community of Pinewood, Colorado had never been a place that hurried through anything. It awakened with the dawn, stretched leisurely, and moved through each day like a gentle stream flowing around weathered boulders. At the town's heart stood Valley Grocery, a modest neighborhood market with worn linoleum flooring and a brass bell that chimed with each visitor's entrance. Robert Stevens dried his hands with a cloth behind the customer service counter, observing the peaceful activity of a Thursday morning. 8 years as store manager had taught him to recognize nearly every face that crossed the threshold. Farmers, educators, ranchers, young parents with children clinging to shopping carts. Pinewood was the type of place where you knew not only people's names, but their entire life stories. That's precisely why Jessica Williams stood out so distinctly. Robert had hired her 3 months earlier. She'd arrived with a confident handshake, a straightforward smile, and a resume that simply stated U.S. Army veteran. She rarely discussed her past, but her story was written in the cautious way she moved, a deliberate precision in every step. If you paid attention, you'd notice the faint metallic sound when she walked, the subtle difference in her right leg's movement. Prosthetic. Robert had recognized it immediately on her first day, though he'd never questioned her about it. Jessica Williams performed her duties with military precision, scanning purchases with practiced efficiency, greeting patrons with a gentle, consistent "good morning" or "have a wonderful day." She was dependable, courteous, and completely unshakable. In a community that valued hard work above all else, she should have blended in seamlessly. But Robert noticed the stares. It began with small things, customers pausing an extra moment before choosing her checkout lane, quiet conversations after they'd passed. Once, a child asked loudly why the lady had a robot leg. Robert had handled it gracefully, offering the boy a piece of candy and steering the discussion elsewhere. Jessica had simply smiled as though it hadn't affected her at all. But Robert knew better. He could see it in the subtle ways, the slight tightening around her eyes, the way she sometimes busied herself organizing bags when no customers were present. She wasn't ignored, not exactly. People noticed her. They just didn't know how to process what they saw. This particular morning had been no different. Jessica stood at checkout station 4, neat in her forest green Valley Grocery polo, her auburn hair tucked neatly behind her ears. The prosthetic was visible. Her jeans rode up slightly when she shifted position. Robert leaned against the counter, sipping coffee from his well-worn travel mug, pretending to review inventory while actually keeping watch over her. That's when it unfolded. "Listen, shouldn't you be working somewhere less demanding?" A customer chuckled as he placed a milk jug on her conveyor belt. His tone seemed light but carried a sharp edge. "I'm exactly where I belong, sir," Jessica responded, scanning the milk without missing a beat. The man snorted, shaking his head as if witnessing some elaborate joke. "Must be challenging getting around like that. Probably slows everyone down, doesn't it?" Robert's grip tightened around his coffee cup. Jessica simply finished scanning, bagged his items, and wished him well in the same calm tone. But Robert caught the way her hand lingered a moment longer on the register, steadying herself. Nearby customers said nothing. Some stared at their phones. Others suddenly found great interest in the gum or magazine displays. Silence settled over the area like heavy fog. Robert wanted to intervene. He wanted to escort the man out immediately, but Jessica had made it clear. She didn't want protection. She wanted purpose. Still, the words left a stain on the morning. The entrance chime rang again, and Walter Green entered carrying his familiar worn leather wallet and wearing his old service jacket. Walter was a beloved fixture in Pinewood, a retired postal worker who made it his mission to greet every cashier by name, inquire about their families, and leave a quarter in the charity jar even when change wasn't needed. Walter chose Jessica's line. Robert watched with growing tension. The rude customer still lingered nearby, leaning against a soda display, waiting for someone while murmuring to another shopper, laughing quietly. Jessica rang up Walter's bread, eggs, and jar of peanut butter. She moved carefully but efficiently. Professional. Walter studied her for a long moment, his eyes taking in the metallic gleam beneath her jeans. "Miss," he said loud enough for nearby customers, including the man at the soda display, to hear clearly. Jessica paused, looking up. "You know," Walter continued, his voice steady and clear, "some people think strength means how much weight you can lift." The store grew quieter. Robert set down his coffee, listening intently. "But real strength," Walter said, placing a gentle hand on the counter, "is carrying pain every single day and still standing tall, still showing up, still offering kindness." Robert felt his breath catch. "You, miss," Walter finished, his voice thick with emotion, "are the strongest person in this entire store. And don't you ever forget that." The man by the sodas shifted uncomfortably. A woman holding a basket near the deli section pressed her lips together. Someone cleared their throat nervously. Jessica's hands froze on the register keys. Robert witnessed it, the way her perpetually rigid shoulders relaxed just slightly, the way her mouth trembled for just an instant before she smiled, a genuine smile directed at Walter. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice soft but clear. Walter nodded once, paid for his groceries, and left his quarter in the charity jar with a gentle clink. And just like that, the atmosphere shifted. The silence broke. Several customers nodded respectfully toward Jessica as they passed. Someone whispered, "Thank you for your service." Another quietly left a small bouquet by her register. Robert stood behind the service counter, chest swelling with pride, knowing he had witnessed something significant, something authentic. The day had begun like any other, but today Pinewood had truly seen one of its heroes, and they would never view her the same way again. The remainder of the morning unfolded with an unusual sense of reverence. People moved more gently, spoke more softly. It wasn't mere politeness, it was awareness. Jessica's presence, once quietly avoided, now stood undeniably at the center of Valley Grocery's daily rhythm. Robert continued working behind the service desk, pretending to organize invoices while keeping Jessica in his peripheral vision. He watched as Walter Green's words rippled through the building like a stone dropped into calm water. Initially, the changes were subtle. An elderly woman with arms full of canned goods chose Jessica's line, despite another being shorter. She smiled at Jessica, truly smiled, and said, "Thank you for being here." Jessica blinked, caught off guard, then nodded with a soft, almost shy, "You're welcome, ma'am." By midday, word seemed to have spread without a single text message or whispered conversation. It was something older, quieter. Respect travels faster when it's earned through sacrifice. Still, not everyone adapted easily. Around 12:30, a group of teenagers, likely from the nearby high school, burst into the store laughing too loudly, pushing each other around like they owned the place. Robert kept a watchful eye on them, while Jessica remained steady, scanning sodas and chip bags without flinching. Then he heard it, one muttered comment from a boy wearing a baseball cap, just loud enough to sting. "Bet she lost that leg doing something stupid." Robert tensed immediately, heart racing, but before he could respond, another voice cut through the noise. Not Walter Green this time, but an elderly woman near the deli, sharp-eyed and firm, who turned toward the boys and declared, "You'll pray for half her courage when life tests you, young man." The teenagers froze, mumbling apologies, suddenly fascinated by the cereal aisle. Jessica kept her focus forward, but Robert caught the tiny lift of her shoulders, a breath she released as if she'd been holding it for years. He smiled to himself. Pinewood was slow to change, but once its heart shifted, it shifted completely. Just before Jessica's shift ended, Robert decided he couldn't let the day pass without taking action. Not out of pity or sympathy, but because silence had been the norm for far too long. He grabbed a marker and a sheet of copy paper. With careful, deliberate strokes, he wrote 4 simple words. "Thank you for standing." He didn't ask permission. He didn't call a meeting. He simply taped the sign above Checkout Station 4 where everyone could see it. When Jessica returned from her 15-minute break, she stopped in front of it. Her hands, weathered and strong, trembled slightly as she traced the words with her fingertips. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Robert simply nodded toward her and said, "Shift's almost over. Want me to cover so you can leave early?" Jessica glanced around at the customers smiling at her, at the boy who gave her a shy thumbs up from the dairy section, at the old veteran's cap Walter Green had left on the counter like a silent salute. She straightened her back, her prosthetic clicking softly against the tile. "No, sir," she said. "I think I'll stay a bit longer today." Robert grinned, pleased to hear it. Outside, the sun descended behind the mountains, painting the parking lot in warm gold. The wind carried the scent of approaching rain, and somewhere in the distance a train whistled its lonely song across the valley. Inside Valley Grocery, a quiet battle had been fought that day. Not with shouting, not with violence, but with truth, with kindness, with courage, too stubborn to surrender, too proud to hide. And for the first time since arriving in Pinewood, Jessica Williams wasn't just noticed. She was honored. She was home. The following morning, dawn crept over Pinewood with a crispness that promised colder days ahead. Golden and crimson leaves scattered across the sidewalk outside Valley Grocery, swirling in lazy spirals with each gust of wind. Robert Stevens arrived early as always, keys jingling as he unlocked the front doors. He paused momentarily on the threshold, taking in the quiet hum of the town awakening. There was something different in the air today. Not just the changing seasons, but something quieter, deeper, a transformation that came not from weather, but from hearts. Inside, the store smelled of fresh bread and brewing coffee, familiar scents that wrapped around Robert like a comfortable blanket. He wasn't surprised to find Jessica Williams already inside, preparing her register with methodical precision. She wore the same Valley Grocery forest green polo, her prosthetic concealed beneath faded jeans. But today there was a difference that couldn't quite be articulated. She moved with the same efficient steadiness, yet somehow lighter, as if some invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. Robert raised a hand in greeting. Jessica responded with a small nod, her eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. It was another day, but not quite the same. The early rush came and went, teachers grabbing last-minute supplies, a rancher picking up dog food in a six-pack, retired couples strolling slowly down the cereal aisle, arm in arm. The town maintained its own small, dependable rhythm, but there was a new awareness now. Customers looked Jessica in the eye when they spoke to her. Some smiled longer, some paused to say thank you. Some said nothing, but their expressions spoke volumes. Robert observed it all quietly from behind the service counter, pretending to be absorbed in paperwork while missing nothing. Around 10 o'clock, the entrance chime rang, and a tall figure stepped inside. Robert looked up to see a man in his late 30s, perhaps early 40s, lean and weathered. The kind of person whose bearing revealed military service even before you noticed the worn army jacket. His boots echoed slightly on the floor as he walked, carrying a small brown paper package tucked under one arm. He didn't browse or dawdle. He walked directly toward Checkout Station 4, straight toward Jessica. Robert felt the shift immediately, sensed Jessica go rigid like a taut wire. The man stopped in front of her register, placed the brown package gently on the counter. He removed his cap, pressing it against his chest. "Jessica William?" he asked, voice low but steady. Jessica straightened slightly. "That's me." The man reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded piece of paper, edges soft and worn from being carried too long. He held it out with both hands like something sacred. "My brother," the words caught, and he had to swallow before continuing. "My brother served with you in Afghanistan. His name was Mike Henderson." Robert saw the flicker of recognition in Jessica's eyes, a wound buried too deep to ever fully heal. The man continued speaking, rough and honest. "He didn't make it home, but before he was gone, he told me about you. Said if I ever found you, I needed to say something." He pushed the paper closer. "It's from him." Jessica's hand moved slowly and carefully, taking the letter as if she might shatter if she handled it wrong. She unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases. Robert could only see the back of the paper. Not the words, but he could imagine. Words written hastily in a dusty outpost halfway around the world. Words meant to outlive the man who wrote them. Jessica read in silence, line by line. Her mouth pressed tight, her jaw set firm, but she didn't look away. When she finished, she pressed the letter against her chest, closing her eyes for a long, still moment. The man across the counter waited, cap still gripped tightly against his ribs, his throat working as he swallowed emotion. "Thank you," Jessica said finally, her voice rough but strong. "Thank you for bringing this." The man shook his head, eyes glistening. "No, ma'am. Thank you for everything." For several heartbeats, neither moved, neither needed to. They were soldiers, separated by different wars, different losses, but bound by the same invisible oath. We carry each other's burdens. Finally, the man nodded once, solemn, and turned away. The chimes sang soft and slow as he left. Jessica stood there for a long moment, the letter clutched in one hand, the brown paper package still untouched on the counter. Then quietly, almost like a whisper, she tucked the letter into her apron pocket, straightened her shoulders, and turned back to her register. Not a tear fell, not a sob escaped. She simply continued because that's what warriors do. Robert realized the entire store had fallen into a kind of reverent hush. Even the usual beep of the scanner sounded muted. Across the produce section, an elderly man with a faded Vietnam veteran ball cap lifted a trembling hand and gave a slow, deliberate salute. Jessica saw him, and for the first time since Robert had known her, she allowed herself to respond. She brought her hand up, not a full salute, but a quiet, respectful nod, acknowledging everything they both understood without needing words. Robert felt a lump climb into his throat. He turned away, pretending to adjust a display of apples. But nothing could hide the truth. Today wasn't just another morning at Valley Grocery. Today, Jessica Williams wasn't just the woman at Checkout Station 4. Today, everyone saw her for who she truly was, a living monument not to tragedy, but to survival, to honor, to strength that didn't need banners or medals. And for the first time in a long while, Pinewood remembered what gratitude was supposed to look like. It wasn't loud or flashy. It was a quiet salute from across a produce aisle. It was a paper letter tucked against a beating heart. It was a town that had almost forgotten how to say thank you, finally remembering. Jessica Williams didn't need their pity. She never had. All she ever needed, all she ever deserved, was respect. And today, at long last, she had it. By the time the lunch rush arrived, Valley Grocery was alive with the low hum of conversation, carts rattling over worn tiles, and the occasional ding of the register. But even amid the everyday noise, something about the place felt transformed. Robert Stevens stood near the deli section, rearranging a display of dinner rolls. But his mind wasn't on baked goods. His eyes kept drifting to Checkout Station 4, to Jessica Williams. She moved through her tasks with the same quiet efficiency. But there was a difference now. Customers approached her line without hesitation. Some even went out of their way to choose her. Robert noticed it in small moments. A nod of respect, a lingering smile, an extra thank you at checkout. It wasn't pity, it was acknowledgement. And Jessica, for her part, received it with grace. She didn't bask in it or shrink from it. She simply accepted it the way she accepted everything, steady, unshaken. At 12:45 p.m., Robert saw Walter Green again, the retired postal worker who had defended Jessica the day before, shuffling down aisle 3 with a basket full of apples and crackers. Robert smiled to himself. Walter had always been a fixture in town, but lately he seemed more like a guardian, quietly watching over things. Walter got in Jessica's line again. As he unloaded his basket, he leaned closer and said something that made Jessica's lips curve into a real, genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. Robert didn't catch the words, but he caught the spirit of them. Encouragement, solidarity, quiet friendship. It made him feel proud in a way that surprised him with its intensity. But not everyone was adjusting so easily. At 1:15, just as Jessica was finishing another transaction, a sharp voice cut through the store's hum. "Is this seriously what we've come to?" Robert's head snapped up. A woman stood in line, mid-50s, expensive haircut, manicured nails gripping a designer purse like it might save her from drowning. She wore a tailored blazer far too formal for Pinewood and an expression so sour it could curdle cream. She was staring at Jessica with open disgust. "Hiring people like this," the woman said, voice high and caring. "It's unprofessional. It's disturbing." A hush fell over the nearby shoppers. Someone dropped a can of soup, the clatter echoing unnaturally loud. Robert started moving before he even realized it, anger rising hot in his chest. But he wasn't the first. Walter Green, with his crooked back and worn boots, stepped away from his cart and planted himself between the woman and Jessica. "You watch your tongue, ma'am," Walter said, voice calm but edged with steel. "That person you're talking about has more courage in her pinky finger than you've got in your entire body." The woman recoiled, sputtering. "I have every right to—" "No, you don't!" Walter cut her off sharply. "Not here. Not today." More customers were gathering now, silent but present, a wall of quiet witnesses. Jessica stood behind the register, frozen for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the scanner. Robert reached them just as Walter turned back to Jessica. "You don't have to say anything, dear," Walter said softly, just for her. "You already said enough by surviving." Jessica blinked rapidly, fighting for composure. The woman, realizing the crowd was not on her side, huffed loudly, clutched her designer purse tighter, and stormed out, her heels clicking furiously against the tile. As soon as she was gone, a soft ripple of applause broke out. It wasn't loud or showy, just a handful of people, real people, standing up in the only way they knew how, for dignity, for respect. Jessica pressed a hand to her chest over the spot where the soldier's letter still rested in her apron pocket. Robert stepped up beside her, offering a small nod. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Jessica took a shaky breath and nodded. "Yeah," she whispered, "I'm okay." And somehow, she really was. That night after the store closed and the last receipt was tallied, Robert found himself lingering at Valley Grocery. The aisles were darkened, the hum of the freezers the only sound. He wandered toward checkout station 4, to where the brown paper package still sat, forgotten in the day's rush. He opened it carefully. Inside was a simple hand-carved wooden plaque with 3 words burned into the surface with careful strokes. "Still standing strong." Robert traced the letters with his thumb, throat tight. It wasn't just a gift. It was a reminder, a testimony, a promise. He thought about mounting it on the wall, maybe above checkout station 4. Thought about making it permanent so that anyone who walked into Valley Grocery would know that here, strength wasn't measured by appearances or by how many steps you could take without limping. It was measured by heart, by resilience, by the quiet refusal to surrender. Robert smiled to himself, feeling something settle deep in his chest. Tomorrow, he decided, tomorrow he would find a hammer and some good nails. Because Jessica Williams wasn't just still standing strong, she was carrying them all forward. The following days at Valley Grocery unfolded like a second spring. Word had spread about what happened with Jessica Williams. Not through gossip, but through pride. Stories traveled from the cafe to the gas station, from the barber shop to the church pews. Stories about a woman who had worn the uniform, who had sacrificed part of her body but never her spirit. A woman who showed up every morning, stood behind that register, and gave her best without asking for sympathy or applause. In a town like Pinewood, that mattered more than people realized. Robert Stevens could feel the shift every time he looked around his store. People lined up at checkout station 4 now, sometimes even bypassing open registers just to have Jessica ring them up. Customers brought her coffee. Little kids drew her pictures. Someone anonymously left a bouquet of daisies with a note that said simply, "You are seen. You are valued." Robert had hung the wooden plaque above her register the morning after he found it in the package. Still standing strong. It caught the light just right, and every person who checked out with Jessica saw it. But even positive change has a way of drawing out those who resent it. It happened on a Friday afternoon, right as the weekend crowd started to arrive. Jessica was working her usual shift, the store buzzing around her, when the door swung open hard enough to make the chime sound like an alarm. A man stormed in, heavy-set, red-faced, wearing a jacket embroidered with some company logo. He stomped straight toward the service desk, ignoring everyone else. Robert, stacking a display of canned vegetables nearby, straightened immediately. He knew that look. Trouble. The man slammed his hands on the counter, rattling the donation jar for the local animal shelter. "You the manager?" he barked. Robert wiped his hands calmly on his apron. "Yes, sir. How can I help you?" The man jabbed a thick finger toward Jessica, who was helping an elderly woman bag her groceries at checkout station 4. "That disabled girl," he spat the word like it tasted bitter. "She scanned my wife's groceries yesterday. Took twice as long. My wife came home in tears, humiliated." Robert's heart hammered once, twice, then steadied. He kept his voice level. "I'm sorry your wife had a difficult experience," he said evenly. "But Jessica is one of our finest employees. She's efficient, she's respectful, and she deserves the same respect in return." The man's face darkened, and for a moment Robert thought he might reach across the counter. "She shouldn't be out here where decent people can see her," the man hissed. "It's revolting. She belongs—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. The silence that fell over Valley Grocery was deafening. Every head turned, every eye locked on the scene at the front of the store. Jessica, who had finished helping the elderly woman, stood motionless behind her register, her hands folded calmly. She didn't flinch. She didn't lower her eyes. She just stood there, still standing, strong. Walter Green, who happened to be examining the discount produce bin, stepped forward again. But this time, he wasn't alone. Other customers, young, old, mothers, farmers, teachers, quietly left their carts and formed a semicircle near the front. Robert looked at the man and spoke, his voice firm and caring. "In this store, sir, we value service. We value sacrifice. We value character." He nodded toward Jessica. "And we don't tolerate hatred, not toward our employees, not toward anyone." The man opened his mouth, but Robert wasn't finished. "If that's a problem for you," he continued, steady as a mountain, "you're welcome to take your business elsewhere." A beat of tense silence. Then someone clapped, sharp and singular. Then another, until the whole store echoed with applause. The angry man turned scarlet, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out, the chime above the door jangling in his wake. When he was gone, the applause didn't die immediately. It lingered, swelling like a tide. Robert looked over at Jessica. For a moment, she stood frozen, overwhelmed, caught between disbelief and gratitude. Then slowly she smiled, a small, shy, luminous thing. Robert felt his throat tighten and looked away, pretending to check the receipt paper behind the counter. The town of Pinewood had drawn a line that day, and it had drawn it on the side of grace. Later that evening, after the last customer had left and the floors had been mopped, Jessica found herself standing in front of the plaque above her register. She traced the words again, just like she had that first day. Still standing strong. Robert leaned against the nearby counter, arms crossed loosely. You know, he said casually, I was thinking we could add a second plaque. Jessica raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Robert smiled. Maybe something simple, something true. He walked over, tapped the wood lightly. Courage has many faces, he said. Jessica chuckled softly, a warm, rich sound that filled the empty store. I like that, she said. Robert nodded. Good, because around here we need reminders. He paused, then added more quietly, and people to remind us. Jessica looked around the dim, quiet store, the place that had, against all odds, become her home. She thought of Walter's salute, of the soldier's letter, of the little girl who had left her a hand-drawn picture of a superhero with a metal leg. She thought of survival, of scars, of the way some battles left no visible wounds, but carved themselves deep all the same. Courage has many faces, and one of them today was hers. Jessica Williams smiled, tucked the letter deeper into her apron pocket, and turned off the lights. Another day survived, another day honored, still standing strong and ready for whatever came next. Saturday mornings in Pinewood carried a special kind of stillness. Families lingered longer over breakfast. Kids played on front lawns. The farmer's market at the town square buzzed with easy conversation and the scent of fresh apples and hay. At Valley Grocery, the day began a little differently. Robert Stevens unlocked the doors just before 8, expecting another typical Saturday rush. But when he stepped inside, he found something waiting for him at the front counter, a small envelope. No name, no decoration, just a plain white envelope taped carefully to the base of the register where Jessica worked. Robert peeled it off gently, his name handwritten across the front in small, careful letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats, no complaints, no hate, just a simple request. Robert, if you could find a way, we'd like to honor her properly. No speeches, no fanfare, just real gratitude from all of us who noticed, even when we didn't know how to say it. There was no signature, but Robert didn't need one. He looked up, heart heavy and hopeful all at once. Some debts couldn't be repaid, but some kindnesses could be passed forward. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his pocket. The idea formed almost instantly. Simple, fitting, exactly what Jessica would never ask for, but everything she deserved. By noon, Robert had gathered a handful of trusted friends. Walter Green, 2 high school teachers, Pastor Williams from the town church, and even Officer Martinez from the local police. They huddled behind the deli counter, whispering over coffee and scribbled notes. We can't make it about the wounds, Pastor Williams said firmly. It has to be about the strength. Walter nodded. She ain't broken. She's whole in ways most people ain't. Robert agreed. It has to be quiet, genuine, nothing flashy. They debated logistics, timing, how to make it happen without tipping Jessica off. After all, the woman had a sixth sense for trouble and for attention she didn't want. Finally, they had a plan. Something small, something honest. Something that said, we see you. We honor you. We're better because of you. Sunday morning dawned clear and golden. At Valley Grocery, things seemed normal enough. Jessica arrived early, clocked in without fuss, and began her shift as usual. But as the morning wore on, a subtle change crept into the air. Customers came in more than usual for a Sunday. Families, couples, older folks who didn't normally shop on weekends, and they all lined up at checkout station 4. Jessica scanned groceries with her usual quiet precision, but even she began to notice the patterns. The long lines at her register, the extra smiles, the kids who waved shyly, the people who lingered just a little longer to say, "Thank you, ma'am," with an earnestness that couldn't be faked. She frowned slightly, glancing over at Robert behind the counter, but he just shrugged innocently and kept organizing a display of breath mints. At precisely noon it happened. The chime over the door rang not once, but 3 times in quick succession. Jessica looked up. 3 men entered the store wearing full dress uniforms. Army, Navy, Marines. Their shoes gleamed. Their hats sat square on their heads. Their medals caught the light and threw it back like tiny stars. The store went utterly still. Jessica's hand froze on a box of crackers she was scanning. The men didn't speak. They didn't need to. They walked slow and deliberate through the gathered crowd, weaving between carts and shelves until they reached checkout station 4. The Marine stepped forward first. He removed his hat and saluted. Sharp, clean, full of weight and meaning. The Army soldier followed, then the sailor. 3 salutes, 3 silent honors. Jessica's mouth parted, but no sound came out. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the cracker box down. Walter Green appeared beside her, reaching into his pocket and pulling out something small and round. A coin engraved simply with the words Valor, Service, Home. He pressed it into Jessica's palm, closing her fingers gently over it. Pastor Williams stepped forward next, laying a hand on her shoulder. "You carried us," he said softly, so only she and a few nearby could hear. "Now let us carry you." The crowd behind them stood quietly. No shouting, no speeches, just a forest of bowed heads, hats removed, hands over hearts. Respect not demanded, but freely given. Robert swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. Jessica stood very still for a long moment. Then with visible effort, she lifted her head. Her voice when it came was raw but steady. "I just did what anyone would have done," she said quietly. Walter smiled gently. "Maybe, ma'am, but you did it when it mattered." She closed her fingers tighter around the coin, looked out at the faces, some familiar, some strangers, who had come not to pity her, but to stand with her. And something inside her, something that had been locked away since the day she lost her leg, since the day she came home to silence and stares, finally cracked open. Not broken, freed. Jessica Williams straightened her back, her prosthetic clicking softly against the worn tile. She nodded once, crisp, sure, at the 3 uniformed men, returned their salutes with the same sharpness, the same pride. And for the first time, she let herself believe she was still a soldier. She was still needed. She was still home. The applause started softly, not for show, not for drama, just hands clapping slow and sure, carrying gratitude from heart to hand. Robert clapped too, throat burning, chest aching with something fierce and beautiful. This was how Pinewood said thank you. Not in grand monuments, not in parades, but in the simple act of standing with someone who had already stood so long, so bravely, so alone. Today they stood with her, and they would keep standing as long as it took. The days that followed the quiet salute at Valley Grocery didn't change the world. The news didn't send reporters flooding into Pinewood. There were no viral videos, no flashing headlines. But something more important happened. Pinewood changed, quietly, permanently. The people who had once looked away when they saw Jessica Williams now looked her in the eye. Some smiled, some simply nodded. Some, like Walter Green, found small ways to say what words never quite could. And Jessica kept showing up. Every morning, checkout station 4 came alive with her steady presence. Her soft good morning, her patient scanning of groceries, her quiet courage standing tall behind that counter. But she wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen. And more than that, she was respected. It was a week after the salute when Robert Stevens received a phone call that would change everything again. "Robert, it's Mayor Patterson. Listen, we've been hearing about what's happening over at Valley Grocery, and we have an idea, a way to say thank you, not just to Jessica,